Let's just start with saying that I'm very happy to be here. Göteborg is one of my hometowns, but it's the first time I'm here to talk about my work. So very, very happy to be here and talking to you today. I will be talking about an initiative that the Commission came out with, the European Commission, I should say, came out with last year, which is called the Resource Efficiency Opportunities in the Building Sector. That's a communication that was adopted last year, and we are now working on the implementation of that. The reason for why we're doing this in the first place is that a number of years ago, actually it has already been mentioned by Johan somehow, there was some more general work on resource efficiency being done within the Commission. There were communications coming out for that as well. In that work, resource efficiency and circular economy was looked at in different ways and different angles. One of the outcomes of that was that there are a number of sectors which are particularly important to look at. Those are buildings, it's food, and it's transport. And for that reason, if we want to be serious with what we're talking about, we need to look in particular at those sectors. So since then, I have been working together with colleagues on that building sector and building work, so to say. The reason for this, of course, why buildings was picked as one of the most important sectors to look at is, of course, the numbers that you see in front of you now. Very large number of the extracted material that we have on our planet goes to buildings, equal the energy consumption. A third of our water consumption is being used somehow for buildings or in buildings, and at least a third of our total generated waste is construction and demolition waste. So what this work that we're doing now is trying to do is to sort of lift the view on buildings and not only talk about the energy efficiency of buildings, which has so far had quite a lot of attention, both on the EU level and on member state level. The energy consumption in the use phase of the building, the energy efficiency of our buildings is very much talked about, and for good reasons, no doubt about that. But we want to lift this to take a wider look at it and look at other kinds of resources that we use in and for our buildings, and also to look at the full life cycle of the building. So the overall aim of this communication then is to promote a more efficient use of resources in the construction and renovation of many kinds of buildings, of public buildings, of residential buildings, and obviously of commercial buildings as well. Now, when we talk about how we use our resources, it's not just about we want to reduce the number of tons of something being moved from one place to the other. It is very importantly about the environmental impact that this has. So that's really key. Reduce the overall environmental impact, and again, throughout the full life cycle of buildings. There are a lot of things happening outside the actual use phase of the building. What happens when we extract our materials, when we produce our construction products, when we construct, and of course at the end of life as well. So why isn't this happening by itself? Why do we feel that there's a need for Europe in this case to work in this area? We started 2011, I think, to work in this field, and we have had a lot of stakeholder discussions since then with all kinds of stakeholders, I would say. And it became clear very quickly that there's no common European understanding of what a green or a sustainable building is. For some people, a green building equals an energy efficient building. For others, it means something else, but that something else normally is very different depending on who you ask. We definitely think that it is more than just an energy efficient building, which is not just, I'm not saying that, but we need to take a larger look at it, a larger scope. But it became clear very quickly, as I said, that there was no common understanding, there was no common language, there was no common vision of what this was, and that made it difficult to move on. There is clearly a lack of reliable and comparable data. There's a lot of data out there, but for this data to be comparable, which is probably needed if you want to build up a business case for this, that is not there today in the way we would like it to be. And as we see this lack, there is then an absence of guidance on how to incorporate environmental impacts into not just the purchasing decisions, I would say, but all kinds of decisions along the value chain. So the objective of our work is really to influence decision-making along the whole value chain, to provide relevant, or doing so by providing comparable and relevant information. When I say that our objective is to provide this data, it is rather to make it possible to provide this data. Our idea is to develop an assessment framework with core indicators, which can then be used as a common language in the sector, and also towards the demand side, of course. There are a number of very good commercial schemes, certification schemes out there, and you're probably working with several of those or towards several of those yourselves. But they are typically pulling the best performers. We are interested in providing something which can really step up the standard a couple of notches for the mainstream market, for the standard market. So that's a different objective, really, than what those commercial certification schemes have and work with. It is not our intention to come up with a certification scheme and compete with those existing schemes. That's not the point here. It is rather, as I said, to provide a tool which can be used as a common language and to report between each other, between the different actors in the sectors. So it's more of a reporting tool, which also should be then linked to the demand side, of course. Neither is it our idea to come up with some European benchmarks and say it should be like this or like that. That's up to the member states or the sector itself to work with. But our idea is to come up with these core indicators which could then be used throughout and provide a common language. This assessment framework should be flexible. With that, we mean that it should be possible to use it on its own. I don't know how many indicators it will be, because I will tell you later a bit about the process for this, but I foresee maybe a handful of indicators. So it will be impossible to cover everything, which is important with the building linked to the environmental performance, but the most important things should be captured. But it should also be possible to use it as a module in existing schemes, so that it can sit aside the more scheme-specific sets of indicators, but it would still be used by the commercial schemes. So we have discussions with those commercial schemes, and they are very interested in this. They realize that it would be very good if they were comparable in some major areas. So that is what we are aiming at here. It should be simple to use. That's very nice to say. It's more difficult to actually achieve, but this is our clear target. If we want to be able to attract the mainstream market, we are bound to present something which is simple enough. We hope then that it will be efficient, obviously. Today we know that we have estimated that less than 1% of our buildings in Europe have gone through some kind of an environmental assessment beyond energy efficiency, that is, yeah. And that is not enough, to say the least. So what kind of aspects of the buildings are we considering? Well, what you see here in front of you is certainly not the final outcome. I'm just putting it up here so that you have a feel for what we are discussing. With the communication that came out last year, it was preceded by a public consultation where we had a lot of stakeholders commenting on what they thought would be important or not to look at. And this is basically the outcome of that, I would say. These were the sort of those things that were highlighted in that public consultation. So just to give you an idea, we're not only talking about energy, but we are talking about energy. But most importantly then, when it comes to energy, we're talking about the total energy. Because we see now, for example, that many buildings which are being built to be passive or neutral or whatever you call it, they use so much energy to be constructed, and the material that has gone into it, that it becomes doubtful if it's actually worthwhile or not, so to say. So total energy. The material use, what kind of material are we using and how are we using it? But there's also a lot of other things. Interesting things, I think, are, for example, the use intensity of buildings, which is down at the left there. How can we use, I mean, the most resource efficient building in a sense is the building which is not being built. But of course, we need the function of the building still. So how can we use our buildings in a more efficient way as well? With that, we don't mean to press in more people in the same room necessarily, but there are other ways of going about. So many different aspects of buildings, really. The benefits we think of such a framework would be to, of course, I said before, to build up a common language that would give transparency, and it would help, we think, to build up business case for this, because those business cases exist, but it's difficult to convince people who are not into this area of green buildings if you don't have solid figures to show. We think that this will also then help or support a more effective transfer of best and better practice, because we're not only talking about the very top best practice here, we're talking about better practice. As I said in the beginning, we are striving to improve the standard, the mainstream market more. We hope to expand into more countries and to more markets. Most of the green buildings, whatever we mean by that today, are sort of high-end buildings. They are nice hotels, fancy offices, but we would definitely like to be able to go into the residential area as well, eventually, which makes up about 70% of our buildings, I think, our space, built space. So that will be important, but also to go into different countries where this is not receiving much attention today. Most of our green buildings in Europe are located in a fairly limited number of countries. Of course, we also would like to provide, with this tool, we would like to provide public authorities with relevant data and tools to support their policy when they're trying to build up or construct policy in the building area. We are in touch with a number of member states and their political organizations, and they are aware of, many of them, that they need to do something. They need to go beyond energy efficiency. They need to look at burden shifting and trade-offs and so on, but they're not sure how. So we hope to be able to support them there, and they are certainly supporting us in our work as well. So, my last slide. What does this development process look like, and what do we expect at the end? We have set aside 2.5 years for this development of the framework with core indicators. We started in January. So in summer 2017, we should have a framework with some core indicators that can help us to assess the environmental performance of buildings. We are doing this together with stakeholders. We have set up a number of stakeholder groups to support us in this work. It's key, not only for the quality of the work at the end, of the output, but also for the acceptance and the buy-in of the final product, so that it's not just become something which sits on a shelf somewhere. So we have set up different stakeholder groups. We have already had a couple of meetings. We had our first bigger meeting last week where we discussed very basic stuff, and you would have thought that we should have made that clear already, but we feel we need to have this discussion with a large group of stakeholders, such as, are we only looking at buildings which are, well, the new buildings, new build is obvious, but are we looking at the existing buildings, the existing building stock as such, or are we only focusing then on buildings which go through renovation? Is it at that stage that this framework could enter? Will we focus only on environmental aspects, or will we include health and well-being aspects, for example? Those things would need to be settled very quickly, and they will be, but those are the discussions that we have now. I think that in the end of this, well, summer 2017, we will have some core indicators which the sector will be able to use straight away, should they want to. It's a voluntary tool, I should say that as well. But we will also have probably a roadmap which sets out other areas which we have identified as very important, but where we feel that the sector as in total is not ready to move yet. So maybe a roadmap with 1 or 2 more stages where we expect other indicators to be included then. Thanks. That's all for me now.
Thank you very much.